Hello, Virginia Trioli live from Studio 22. Tonight on Q&A, Jennifer Hunt, Barnaby Joyce, Kate Ellis, Helen Andrews and Joe Siracusa. With a massive swing to the popular Shooters Party in New South Wales, has the Trump revolution already reached our shores? Find out in just a bit. Welcome to Q&A. I'm Virginia Trioli. Joining us tonight, lecturer at the ANU's National Security College, Jennifer Hunt, Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, the Shadow Minister for Early Childhood Education, Kate Ellis, registered Republican and policy analyst Helen Andrews, and global security and diplomacy expert Joe Siracusa. Please welcome our panel tonight. Now, Q&A is, of course, live on ABC TV in New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania, and live everywhere else on News 24 at 9:35 Eastern Daylight Time. Or you can watch and listen live on iView, Facebook and News Radio. So our first question tonight comes from Matt McLaughlin.
With Donald Trump becoming the next president of the United States, what do the panel think is the driving force behind his winning the election? Is it that the silent right, so sick of being denigrated by the left, remained quiet throughout the campaign and came out at the last minute to seal the deal for Mr Trump? Or is it simply that the left, so assured that Ms Clinton would win, didn't feel the need to go out and vote?
Thank you, Matt. Let's start with Joe Siracusa tonight, and we'll hear from all the panel on this one. Thanks, Joe.
That's a long question. Well, let's keep in mind here that Donald Trump got 19% of the Americans who were eligible to vote, 213 million. He got several hundred less, or maybe a million less than Hillary on the night. He got about 19% of the vote of the adult American franchise. And so he did get that kind of silent majority that Richard Nixon counted on. A good friend of mine, former ambassador to China, Gary Woodard, calls it the beginning of the great American cultural revolution. And these people from the Midlands who are just sick and tired of the Eastern press telling them how to think and the rest of it. I think Bernie Sanders people, the millennials, did not vote for Hillary. They did not roll out of bed on Tuesday morning. I don't think they like her. I think Bernie worked her over for 6 months, and they just didn't feel warm about her. Now, there's a lot of reasons why she lost, but at the end of the day, I think we underestimated the white, what they call the white working class in the United States. So we didn't realize that people who wore red hats and went to work in the heartland would be so faithful about voting, and they voted about 80%. So that was the clincher on the night. But look, we've seen it before with Richard Nixon. The silent majority did the same thing for him. I mean, this is nothing new under the sun.
OK. Helen Andrews.
Well, remember, Donald Trump wasn't the only person to win on Tuesday. That election also gave us a Republican majority in the Senate, a Republican majority in the House, Republican majority of state governors, and 69 out of 99 state legislatures now controlled by Republicans. So it wasn't just a victory for him personally. It was a victory for the Republican policy agenda. But to your question about the white working class, they do feel abandoned by the Democratic Party. And the stories that we're beginning to see coming out of the sort of post-mortem of the Clinton campaign shows that they were absolutely correct. Reports are now revealing that Bill Clinton and Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell were begging the Brooklyn headquarters, pay more attention to Michigan, go have rallies, appeal to the white working class, just at least show them that you haven't forgotten them. And the Brooklyn headquarters said, no, we don't need to. So the white working class felt that the Democrats had abandoned them, and you know what? They were right.
Kate Ellis.
Look, I actually think there's been a bit of an irony which has become apparent, where we have all of these people talking about, when you look at the US, you can see that there's been this huge distance between the issues that politicians care about and the issues that the general punters care about. But then often the politicians follow it up by saying, and what the US election shows is that my pet issue is exactly the reason why voters voted that way. I mean, we've heard so many different theories that this didn't mean everything. What it meant was that we do know that there is a really difficult economic transition that a lot of people are going through. And we do know that they feel like they're not being heard and that they're not being supported through that. And that is really clear that that's happening in the US, and it's clear that it's happening to a lesser extent in many parts of Australia.
Barnaby Joyce.
Well, I believe in class participation, so I think there's a good way to answer this. Hands up those in the audience who support Donald Trump. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. So that's basically a good reflection on what was part of the architecture of this. No major paper said he was going to win. No major poll said he was going to win. Everybody's entitled to their view, but the view of this room is overwhelmingly one that doesn't support Donald Trump. And there's a sense of frustration that builds up amongst people. They feel that they're being belittled. They feel that they're not being listened to. They feel that every time they stick their head up, they're somehow ridiculed because their beliefs are not of the standard fare. However, when people feel belittled and when they feel isolated from the political system, they can still vote. And they do. And they turn up, even though they may feel belittled, even though they may feel marginalised. And that was, I think, many of the vote was not so much for Trump, but a sense of, I'm sick of being told how to think by others.
Jennifer Hunt.
Look, we could spend the entire hour, really, talking about this issue. I think there's been a lot of talk about economic anxiety, cultural backlash. Some of the major decisions that are being made in the United States are seen to be made outside elected representation. For example, marriage equality was handed down by the Supreme Court. I would note that I don't consider this a mandate. You're talking about 51 different elections, really. 50 states plus the District of Columbia, and each state controls the electoral processes in those states. It's in very slim margins, 25,000 voters, Wisconsin, 50,000, Michigan. And this is the first election that we've had in 60 years without some key protections of the Voting Rights Act. Which means that when states commissioned research on how voters behave and categorized it by race and then surgically tried to eliminate those processes that minorities use, this could have had an impact given that we have some very slim margins of victory. So I would keep that in mind.
Just before we move on to our next question, I think it's important to note that we actually do have a Trump voter here tonight. And Helen, can you speak to us a little bit about why you've been in Australia for a while, but you're eligible to vote in the States, and why that was your choice?
Well, I didn't just support Trump privately. I endorsed him publicly in The American Conservative the week before the election, back when it looked like he was going to lose. Trump speaks to issues that have been not just neglected, but deliberately sidelined by the Republican establishment. Things like immigration, things like he was the peace candidate this time around. Those are my two main voting issues, and they're ones where he was the only one in the primary who shared my values. And
just before we move on, is it difficult for you to reconcile the fact that you're a Republican with supporting Donald Trump, supporting Republicans as well as him? They are maybe about to come closer together, but they were a long way apart during that campaign.
Well, you know, people sometimes characterize this election as a threat to democracy. Well, I think it was a...
I didn't say that.
No. Well, where I'm going is that the Republican primary was a perfect example of democracy. You're absolutely right that the party establishment did not want Donald Trump to be their nominee, but the people spoke through the primary process and managed to be heard. So the fact that the party permitted that to happen, however reluctantly, I think is very reassuring for the strength of democratic values in that party. So no, that's not hard to reconcile at all.
OK, let's go to our next question, which comes from Steve Waters.
Hi, I would like to know, would the panel, will you think that the Trump phenomenon was used as an excuse, or will be used as an excuse by the major parties of Australia to wake up to the fact that the voters are dissatisfied with the overall performance and petty bickering and infighting way before Trump ran for president?
So you're saying that you think there's a precedent here in Australia already for dissatisfaction a long time before the Donald Trump phenomenon? Yeah. OK. Barnaby Joyce, let's start with you on that, because, I mean, it's something you referenced in your first answer. Yep. You and every politician in this country has to be well aware of this, and clearly you have been for some time. So if you've been aware of it for some time, why has it taken until Donald Trump for everyone to start saying, my goodness, these people are not listened to?
You notice I never said anything, although I'm known for not holding my tongue and speaking my mind, I never said anything publicly that was against possible President of the United States, because I think that's incredibly foolish for us. You can talk about certain actions which you might disagree with. You can certainly talk about policies, but you can't go argumentum ad hominem against a person who is going to end up as one of our greatest strategic allies, whether we, and if we didn't, we'd have to put another couple $100 billion on the year in taxes for the defence expenditure of our nation. I just note this, that Trump is not an independent. He's a member of the Republican Party. He's a candidate for the Republican Party. There were 4 people on the ballot for the United States president, for which there was candidate Hillary Clinton, there's President-elect Donald Trump, there was also a Green and an Independent. The Green got less than a fraction of 1%, and the Independent, I think, got less than 2%. So to say that this was a third candidate just doesn't stand up to reason. He was a candidate of the Republican Party. Not only was he a candidate of the Republican Party, he'd been through the primaries so that the members of the Republican Party had picked him. This is a genuine Republican candidate.
I guess the question, though, goes to the fact that we have known here in Australia about the fact that there's been dissatisfaction amongst many voters in this country with the way that the major parties have their infighting, their bickering,
Sure.
the particular issues that they are focused on, to the exclusion of issues that really matter to Australians, and whether Trump now is going to be used as a sort of a cover-all phenomenon.
The problem is, Virginia, is everybody as you said at the start, everybody says, well, the issue that they're not taking on board is my issue. Now, if you line up all my issues, you end up with this sort of null void because they all cancel each other out. So therefore you have to look at something more substantial that sits behind that, and which is the idea that the media can affect the polls is now starting to move. There is a sense of, to be quite frank, of a certain class that it's not regarded by wealth, but it's noted by a certain political view, and they have an immense political dominance in the political discussion. But they're not out there, and we'll see it even in Australia, they're not out there in the boondocks, and they're not out there in the western suburbs. Remember, we live now in the generation of Facebook and Twitter, where the vast majority are not watching this program, and they're not reading the papers, and therefore you have a more accentuated form of political debate which grabs on certain issues. And one of the ones that Vice President Pence and President-elect Donald Trump said was, we don't care about the status quo, we're going to smash it.
OK. I want to go back to Steve, the question. Yes?
With all due respect, Mr Joyce, that wasn't quite the question. It was actually, will the politicians of Australia, can they not see that there's dissatisfaction? Yeah. It's not just about a Trump thing, it's about dissatisfaction with people who vote in Australia about the political process as it is. And there's prime ministers turning over, there's people, there's backfighting and bickering.
What you're saying is the turmoil. If you said dissatisfaction in the political process, then what you'll have is the left wanting us to be more left, the right wanting us to be more right. You can have all manner of things. I think there is a role for politicians to temper some of those excesses. Otherwise, there'll be a whole range of things. We bring back the death penalty and a whole range of things which might pass popular appeal, but I won't be supporting it. I think there's also some sort of honour and purpose to political office that goes beyond just being a complete temperature gauge for whatever issue just happens to be running around at that day.
I want to hear from Kate Ellis on this as well.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Everybody can see that the level of cynicism about politics in Australia has reached a high. I'm a South Australian, so I've seen that materialise in a huge Nick Xenophon team vote, but we've seen it in different parts of the country, people moving different ways. I think that there is a real issue about people not trusting their members of parliament and people feeling like, and frankly, if you look at the last decade or so, you can understand why people might feel like members of parliament have been more focused on each other, their internal divisions, than on the issues that matter to the people of Australia. So I think you're absolutely right about what the problem is. I think what's harder to answer, other than making sure that each and every day we're focused on the key issues about jobs, about health, about education, is how you build that trust back. And that's really hard to do because I suspect that in times past, people would have had more face-to-face contact with their members of parliament. There are people who talk about the town hall meetings that they'd go to. You could actually ask the questions, engage and debate. And perhaps with people flying here, there and everywhere with social media, there's not as much of that direct contact. But we need to turn it around because our democracy relies upon the Australian public having faith in it.
Let's hear our next question now, which comes from Aaron Tavaniti.
Thanks, Virginia. Of the many reactionary undercurrents that Donald Trump rode to become president-elect of the United States, the most shameful and deeply troubling was the vehement white nationalism and poisonous racism that was more widespread than many people thought. With this normalisation of resentment and often hatred for the other, do you hold out any hope for minorities in countries of migration, or do you think that the rejection of multiculturalism will continue unabated?
I'll come to politicians perhaps at the end of that, but I'd like to hear from Joe Siracusa.
Yeah, America, as you know, is an immigrant country, and about 30 million people rolled in between 1880 and 1920. And a lot of people hated their guts when they came in. They built the roads and the rest of it. And it was America's always been a melting pot. I mean intermarriage. I don't mean just getting together. In the 1920s and 30s, Californians sent back 2 million Mexican Americans, most of them Mexican Americans, because they didn't fit in because of the Great Depression. 1950s, Detroit and the Midwest sent 50,000 or 500,000 Mexicans back to Mexico for fear of losing jobs. I mean, and race has always been there. It's been, as Thomas Jefferson said, the fly in the ointment. We've always had to figure it out. We've had to deal with it. But let me tell you, my father, who's gone, would have been staggered to find out that we have black Supreme Court justices, black mayors, Jewish Supreme Court justices, Irishmen teaching at Harvard, and all the rest of it. Let me tell you, America has made gains in the last 50 years, and unless you have an historical perspective, you wouldn't know that.
So are you saying that this is just cyclical then?
This is cyclical, like the struggle for one race to get ahead of the ethnic and the racism thing. I mean, it's built in, but we work it out and we work it out, and it's not always going to be perfect. I mean, it's going to be rough around the edges, but I think in terms of the last 50 or 60 years, we have made enormous gains.
Jennifer Hunt, are you that optimistic as Joe Siracusa is?
Well, I would just note, where is this coming from? This is a candidate that has started his political campaign with a conspiracy theory. Right? That's really how he can cut his teeth in politics.
Which one are you referring to?
The birther theory, which sought to discredit President Obama. And that was really a choose-your-own-adventure of Islamophobia or racism or nativism. And he even continued to undermine the president's authority. In the later rallies that I was watching, he referred to him as President Obama. So I think the modeling behavior is very powerful that you mentioned, as well as his recent appointment of the strategic office of Brannon. And if anyone has seen Breitbart News, that should strike fear in the heart of everyone regarding the role of conspiracy theories, the mainstreaming of conspiracy theories, and misinformation, and how that information flows across borders. Australia is not immune to this. And so we really need to be vigilant about making sure our own populations aren't radicalized by some of these views becoming normalized.
Oh, so that's an anxiety of yours, that actually the backlash against it is the radicalising of some community members? Absolutely.
These rallies were broadcast without analysis, without fact-checking, and some of the statistics are staggering. I remember watching a rally where he said that Hillary wants to bring in 300, what was it? Let me just check my notes here. 650 million refugees, tripling the size of the United States. He said that the crime rate is the highest in 45 years. He said Americans are the most highly taxed citizens on earth. These are all designed to evoke fear and anger. These were strategic. He also said that there are 1.5 million dead people on the voter rolls. Of course, turnout is low. But that...
Jennifer, we'll leave it there because I want to hear from Helen Andrews on this, and also, so your response, please, but also to return to the question about, whether it is racism. Was it an appeal to racism, and is that how you saw it?
With all due respect to the questioner, it is absurd to say that Donald Trump rode into office on some wave of racial resentment when he got a higher proportion of the black vote than Mitt Romney did and a higher proportion of the Hispanic vote than Mitt Romney did. You know, the accusation that Donald Trump is some kind of racist bigot is thrown about very casually. But when you ask people, what exactly do you mean by that? What's your evidence for this really, outlandish claim? It's things like he wants to enforce the border. That's not anti-Latino, that's pro-sovereignty. Or things like he supports law enforcement. That's anti-rioting. The radical Black Lives Matter movement actually has very low support in the black community because those are the communities that are most victimized when criminals are emboldened.
Many American Muslims, of course, took his line about deporting Muslims to be exactly that, to be a racially based policy and therefore offensive to them.
Donald Trump has proposed a temporary ban on migration from countries known to be sources of terrorists, and that is a position at one extreme. But there's also the position at the other extreme, which is the Angela Merkel position, which is basically that her country will accept as many people from those countries as can manage to show up. My own personal view is somewhere between the two. But of the two extremes, at least Donald Trump's position has the virtue of prudence and erring on the side of safety, rather than erring on the side of recklessness in a way that has ended up in disaster.
Kate Ellis, do you have a view there?
Well, I would just say that there are a number of things that Donald Trump clearly said which were racist. I think saying that Mexicans were rapists coming across the border, I think we've just got to call that. But I guess, I could sense when you were asking that question that you felt that. And in some ways, I felt that about the sexism. I really personally felt that when this result came in, what did that mean about people's attitudes towards women? And I've really grappled with that question a lot. And in the end, I think that what you can come back to is that Donald Trump can have his views, but it's up to people, good people, to stand and fight for the values that are important to us. And that is exactly the same with multiculturalism. That is the same with gender equality. And this is going to be really important for Americans in the next few years, I suspect.
Barnaby Joyce, can I pull you back to the question, which was about multiculturalism in this country and whether it might be under threat by what the questioner sees as some troubling aspects of Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, look, we are not the United States of Australia. We're Australia. We're our own country. And I'm really proud of that. And so I don't think that when you look at another nation and say, oh, look what happened there, that's going to happen here.
The parallels aren't clear for you, are they?
No, I just don't see it. I didn't turn up here with a heap of bodyguards. I walked to work. I don't have the American razzmatazz. In fact, some people say I should try and get a little bit more, polish my performance somewhat. But it's, so I don't get this thing like, oh my gosh, just because something happened in another country, therefore it happens here. I respect the decision of that country. I respect the decision of their electors. They've made their choice, and that's exactly what they're supposed to do. I'm not going to try and sort of second judge them, but on some of the things where you said, oh, border security. Look, even today, Bill Shorten says we're on a unity ticket on this one. So all nations want, if you want to prevail at an electoral level, you've got to show that you have control of your borders. If you don't, if you can't prove that, people, despite what might, to be honest, felt in this room, people will vote you out. And they'll vote you out very, very quickly. So these things are political imperatives. So what President-elect Trump has talked about there is he's just sort of exacerbated but manifest something in an issue, building a wall, which really explains what a lot of people's concerns are. Do you have control of our borders? And you know what? We do exactly the same thing here on both sides of the political fence.
But it's not quite building a wall, though. I take your point and I accept your point about, you're quite right, I can't imagine any political party getting elected here to office without being strong on borders, as the phrase goes. But hasn't this been taken to an extent now that clearly, according to our questioner this evening, is enormously distasteful? The idea of a wall, the idea of deporting people, the language that was used around immigrants and immigrants of certain races. Hasn't that taken it to a new level that has to cause us some disquiet?
The greatest judge of that has to be the American people themselves, who are not foolish and went to the ballot box and voted. And as has been pointed out already, is that President-elect Trump received a very high Latino vote. Yep. He received a higher black vote than what he said, Romney. So, they're the judges. It's their country. They've made the judgment call, and obviously they too have said, look, we want strong borders. And And there's nothing terribly unusual about that, because that's precisely what we're saying here in Australia. Because once you have a stronger border, as sort of it might appear oxymoronic, you have the capacity to be more compassionate, because you have the capacity to sell to your people that you can bring people into this country under a proper vetting process, and that's how you allow yourself to become one of the most generous nations on earth, in which Australia is, in bringing in refugees, which is what I want. But you've got to be able to provide back to people away from Broadway, away from Ultimo, that you have the show under control. And if you can't prove that out in Parramatta, in Blacktown, in Mount Druitt, in Tamworth, in Ipswich, then they're going to say to you, that's all very well, and they're going to go just Trump-like. They're going to be nice and quiet. They'll never take you on in a debate because they don't want to be belittled or humiliated. They'll just vote against you.
I'll just say quickly, though, Ultimo's not in control. It's not the ABC at Ultimo that's in control. Other people are elected to office, not us. You're watching Q&A. We're discussing the Trump victory and the implications for Australia. The next question comes from Sandy Jackson.
Good evening. How likely is it that Trump will honour the US commitment to take our asylum seekers, given his anti-immigration stance and particularly his treatment towards Muslims?
We'll hear from Helen Andrews on that, because there's an interesting discussion around this already, and we're hearing from some high-profile Conservatives saying never going to happen, you know. And once he's in office, if it's done under Barack Obama, he'll unstitch it. What's your view?
No, I expect the deal will stand. Firstly, because the numbers are just a drop in the bucket. Secondly, because I believe the Prime Minister has said that the numbers that America will be accepting will be within its statutory refugee quota, not on top.
It's not on top of it. It's
Exactly.
part of. That's right. Yeah.
So I have every reason to expect the deal will stand. I wouldn't be worried about it.
Joe Siracusa?
Yeah, I think the deal will stand because it isn't going to cause much of a ripple. And I understand it's a quid pro quo as well. Apparently, Australia has done some things for Central America that we'd like you to do. Well, look, I got to say something, you know, about why people didn't vote for Trump. I mean, I voted for Hillary, even as a dual national, and I think he's an appalling human being. I mean, I don't think he has any damn policies. I think he's as dumb as Ronald Reagan, and he's meaner than Richard Nixon. But I accept, you know, he had a base out there, and they were conspiratorial, all right. They thought professional wrestling was real and the moon landing was a fake. I understand the Midwest. I grew up there. But I thought he was an appalling human being. You can't say those things in public and then expect us to forget it the day after. He couldn't work in an Australian university. I doubt if Kmart would hire him, for God's sakes. The way he talks. I mean, he's just an appalling human being. So whether he sticks to policies, we don't know. He had a number of policies. He started to unveil them, and I think he'll be a very conventional president in one sense, but I'm appalled that the world thinks that we think that is the new normal. It is not the new normal. Smart guys like Brooks at the New York Times, David Brooks, says that you give him 1 year to quit the job or get impeached. So he doesn't think he's going to be around for long.
We'll come back to some of the points you made tangentially in our conversation this evening. Kate Ellis, your response to the question here about whether that deal will go through or not. Do you have doubts about it?
Well, I mean, obviously, we have absolutely no idea what Donald Trump will do when he's president. I mean, from my mind, we need to end the indefinite detention that these people are subjected to. We need to get them out of where they are. So I think it would be really tragic if there was hope given, and then because of US politics or because of our government not securing the deal, that once again it was these vulnerable individuals who bore the brunt of that. But we just don't know. And we don't know because we don't know what Donald Trump's going to do, and we don't know because, frankly, when it comes to the government's previous attempts, we know when there was announced with great fanfare that people were all set to head off to Cambodia, and of course we saw that millions of taxpayer dollars but very few lives which were changed by that. So I hope that this brings about the end to indefinite detention. I do, but I have no idea whether that's going to happen or not.
We do need to note here, however, that the indefinite offshore detention has been a unity ticket between the two parties.
No, that is not true. We have not supported indefinite detention at all.
But indefinite detention has been the upshot of the offshore processing and the offshore camps that we've had in place for a long time.
Indefinite detention has been the upshot of a government not prioritising moving people on because it's already served their political purposes.
Labor didn't want these people on these shores either.
No, but Labor said, and we have repeatedly said, that negotiating and finding resettlement options should have been a priority, and it should have been a priority that took less than 3.5 years.
And I'd like to hear from Barnaby Joyce on this as well.
Well, the Labor Party's idea was Malaysia, which was not part of the UNHCR protocols. That's why they didn't go to Malaysia.
The deal didn't go through in the Parliament.
People have wanted us to get people off Manus and Nauru, and I think even this room, for a while. We've been working diligently towards that. We have come up with a result which will allow us to the best of our abilities to possibly bring that event to conclusion. One of the things we need this legislation passed so that people cannot come back to Australia if they came here by boat illegally. Now, the reality is people then bring up exceptional cases. The minister retains that right to make exceptions and bring people in if they have to.
It's also not illegal to claim asylum.
To bring people in if they have to. So if the Labor Party wants to help us in doing something that we have been... And the good thing about this is we have kept mum about this. We knew what we needed to do. We've been working incredibly hard to make sure this happens. And right at the 11th hour, we now have the Labor Party once more saying that a crucial piece of legislation which we need to fulfil this to close the circle, they won't pass. Now, you asked the question, do we believe that the United States will be part of this process? Well, first thing is that this sits within their refugee requirements. This sits within their requirements as it speaks.
But do you believe Donald Trump would want to honour it, from what you know?
I can't... Even if I do know, and the problem with me, Virginia, is because I'm on the National Security Committee, I do know, and so I can't... So I can't...
Well, then I really do want to know.
And that's where I really can't answer you.
I want to go back to our questioner. Thanks, Sandy.
My question is, why do you have to send them to the US? Why do you have to send them to Malaysia, Cambodia? Why don't you bring them to Australia?
Yeah, well, we've got... The reason for that is because what will happen immediately that we do that is people who make about $10,000 a pop for putting people on a boat, and they don't care whether they get there or not. They don't care. They got their money. We know of about 1,200 that drowned. Now, that doesn't mean there's not more. That just means what we know of. And therefore, you can't... These are men, women and children. You can't open up that process again, because that's precisely what will happen.
OK. All right, our next question this evening comes from Kelly McNichol.
The election in the United States illustrated a deep divide between rural and urban communities in that country. In Australia, rural communities such as Griffith, New South Wales, which my family and friends live in, feel that their voices are not being heard by the major parties, and important issues such as water security for farmers, crucial freight infrastructure are being overshadowed by immigration and a plebiscite which could be solved by a simple vote in Parliament. My question is for you, Barnaby Joyce. What, if any, initiatives are the National Party going to push for to support rural Australia and to avoid what has happened in the United States?
That imagine that's a question for me.
Yep.
The first thing is that at the last... I'll give you Orange for an example. OK, that was a bad outcome for the National Party, without a shadow of a doubt. Each one of those booths that voted against us voted for us 4 months ago.
What's happened in that short period of time?
Yeah, a couple of decisions. Greyhounds and council amalgamations being two of the biggies. So what you're saying there is precisely right. People do believe that Canberra and other areas, and some, to be honest, the ABC at times, gets fascinated in questions that are inside the Beltway that have got absolutely zero and nothing to do with our lives out there. And we see it just occupying more and more oxygen. And it creates a frustration, not only towards the political class, but towards the ABC as well.
Well, you can pin it on the ABC if you like, but the ABC wasn't responsible for the backpack attacks.
Well, hang on, the ABC is responsible for some of your comments, such as when you talked about Trump should be subjected to an IQ test.
No, I never said that. I'm sorry, Barnaby Joyce, I'm sorry. I need to pull you up there. That quote was incorrect.
What was it?
It was incorrect.
What was the
quote? And
quote?
the record was corrected.
What was the quote?
It was not about Trump supporters at all.
What was the quote then?
It was not about Trump supporters.
So you're not going to say what the quote was about?
The quote was about people who believed that I was working for Trump that morning.
So the thing is, there is a frustration. Yes, there is a frustration, and you're dead right. If we don't focus clearly on our people and express to them clearly what their issues are, yes, there will be a sense of resentment in how they vote. And I know that. And so I say to my colleagues all the time, mate, the first thing you do when you get off the plane, get into the pub on a Friday night and say good day. You know, go down to your CWA, do all the things that make people chuckle, but do them. Because if you don't do them, you won't hear those messages coming back. Put those people in a forum where they don't feel that they're somehow going to be overawed or felt like it's a condescending approach. You put yourself at their level and talk to them, and what more else can you do? And then you try, when you get down to Canberra, to fight for their issues, which we do.
So what should happen in the National Party now that Troy Grant and Adrian Piccoli have stood aside? I mean, that's decimating at the absolute top of that party. Where does the party go to now, and who leads it?
It was a bad result, and basically two people paid for it with their jobs. You can't. That's what happens. Sometimes when silly things happen, people, you know, it's a bad result, and I commend Troy Grant because he was a man. He went out and said, well, OK, that was a bad result and here's my job.
But does it...
I'll hand it back in. And then the deputy says, I'll hand him my job as well. Now, that is a sign of a party that is well and truly listening, that has taken it on board. And the reason they do that is that we've got to recalibrate and work out what we're doing. The first thing we do is we work very hard from this day for the next 2.5 years to regain those people's respect. And we haven't lost a seat yet either. So, I mean, it's very, very close. But to regain those people's respect and get back in there and get the result we got merely 4 months ago when we won every one of those booths.
I do want to hear from those, but I just need to ask you this question because Shadow Agriculture Minister Joel Fitzgibbon says you should take your fair share of the result in Orange.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he?
Well, of course, but his quote is this: the Orange electorate is a prominent destination for backpackers. The government backpacker tax debacle was undoubtedly a major issue for the local community. Well, I just like your response.
Well, yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to give it to you, Virginia Trioli. Now, it's what it is they're proposing a tax, all right? They're proposing a tax of 10.5%. That means for an Australian worker going into a field over a 15-week period, if you're a sharer, for instance, averaging about $60,000 a year, the backpacker next to you is going to pay half the tax rate on that period of time that the Australian's going to pay. And they think this is fair. And we brought up a rate that attracts people into our nation, which is comparatively better on net terms than New Zealand, than Canada, than the United Kingdom, and the Labor Party start taking their economic advice from Senator Jackie Lambie and come up with a 10.5% rate because they just want to start a fight. They just want to start a fight. And you got the bloke who's head of the AW, Mr. Bill Shorten, who's now proposing that Australian workers are discriminated against in favour of overseas workers, and in the same time he's saying he's supporting Australian jobs. That's what people hate. That's what they get so cynical about.
Let's hear our next question now from Rochelle Shafazli.
Thank you. Based on the surprising result of the American presidential election, and here at home seeing more politics and less action from our politicians, should we expect One Nation to become a major party and Pauline Hanson as our possible future Prime Minister?
Kate Ellis, we'll start with you.
No. That's all. No.
Just before you finish, a quick one-word answer from you, Barnaby, yes or no?
No. Look, I respect the 500,000 people who voted for One Nation, but it's a lot harder running the show than talking about the show.
OK, I'll come back to Kate Ellis.
Oh, I was just going to say, we should keep reminding ourselves that we are not America, that we have a different set of circumstances, that we should not try to be America, that we should not follow America in whatever direction they go with Donald Trump. I think we need to be really careful that we don't overstate what Donald Trump's election means for us here in Australia. But having said that, there's also a number of differences. We didn't go through the deep recession that they went through. We also know compulsory voting means if they had compulsory voting, I suspect we would have seen a very different result in the US. So I don't think we should all start getting the Pauline for PM merchandise ready. But that's not to say that we shouldn't heed the warning and make sure that we do look at the rising levels of inequality and that we do make sure that we are bringing along the Australian public with us.
Well, Helen Andrews, they said this, exactly this about Donald Trump, that it couldn't happen, that it wouldn't be the result. So maybe you have a different perspective.
And they were wrong, but I don't think they're wrong in this case.
Okay.
I don't think you're likely to see a Trump-like phenomenon in Australia for the simple reason that things are not as bad here as they are in the Rust Belt and in Appalachia. In those regions, the decline of manufacturing is just the beginning. Deaths from drug overdoses have doubled since 2000. You have 40% of new births in the United States to unmarried mothers. 1 in 6 men of working age is out of the workforce. And most of those men don't show up in the unemployment numbers because they've simply dropped out. They're not looking for a job, wouldn't take a job if it were given to them. And 25% of those men play more than 3 hours of video games a day. So these are men who are living in their parents' basements, not looking for jobs. So this isn't just economic decline. This is depression and despair. And I don't think you have that, even though people in rural Australia are doing it tough, not quite that bad.
Jennifer Hunt, do you agree?
I would say, given that we didn't run a fact-based campaign, the perception is probably more crucial here than the reality. So even if the reality is that the situation is quite different here, if that's portrayed in the light that Donald Trump used and repeated lies, 560 unique lies that he told over the course of that campaign, I don't think we can be complacent.
Joe Siracusa?
I don't think it'll ever come to that, though I have to say I arrived 1 month after Gough Whitlam was elected, and I have seen the rough and tumble of Australian politics. I've got to meet all your prime ministers and write about them and analyze them. And politics is fought as tough here as anywhere in the world. But Australians, at the end of it, they have a tendency to sit down and have a beer. It just does not become a civil war.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing. Yeah.
Our next question comes from Sheena Zeng.
Trump is notorious for his inappropriate and insulting comments towards women, yet the exit polls show that the majority of white women voted for Trump over Clinton. So why and how did this actually happen?
It's a really interesting question, and it's one that many grapple with. Helen Andrews, I'd love to hear from you first on that.
Well, when I'm asked that question by an American, the answer is very easy. I just say, did you support Bill Clinton? Because on the Bill Clinton meter of pathological serial sexual predation, Donald Trump barely moves the needle. But of course,
I don't know if many would agree with you, and I'm not going to put up two men there and see and try and figure out whose peccadillos are worse.
Because that's not a contest. That's a contest where nobody wins.
But looking at his comments,
yes,
which have been on the record for years, and I'm not talking about old ones. I'm talking even about recent ones. It's pretty extraordinary.
Trump's comments about women factor into my own judgment about whether or not I think he respects women. But you know what else factors into that? The fact that at a time when Manhattan real estate was a boys' club, he appointed women in his company to run his construction sites. It's affected by the fact that he appointed Kellyanne Conway to be the first woman to run a successful presidential campaign. A shattering of the glass ceiling, every bit as impressive as Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
He's raised his daughter to be just as much of a businesswoman as any of his sons.
So just very quickly to the question, is that the reason then that so many women, or at least I think the majority of white women, voted for him? Is that in your view the reason?
Yes, because
that they could see things like his support of
he surrounds himself with strong women. Yes, okay. But also it's the fact that if you begin using, if you make lechery a disqualifying characteristic in politicians, you're going to have to throw out JFK. And a lot of other politicians that I at least would just as soon not be without.
Kate Ellis, what's your response to the question?
Well, I mean, it isn't just the bragging about sexual assault, which we then say, how can women go and vote for him? What I also struggled with, one of the things that I found the most offensive was that footage when he was talking to a group of 10-year-old girls and went past and said, how old are you? 10. One of you will be my girlfriend in 10 years' time. To look at a 10-year-old, like, I don't think that's funny, sorry. Well, to look at a 10-year-old and automatically think of a sex object, I don't understand how fathers of daughters, how good men, how... so I really struggled with this question. What does it mean when women have gone out and they know it? It was, you know, it got a lot of coverage. And I mean, one of the things that I think is that perhaps it wasn't that unusual to them. Perhaps that's their lived experience. That's the way that men treat women all the time, and they saw that as, yeah, it's not great, but it happens in every workplace, and so it didn't rule him out. And if so, that is incredibly, incredibly sad, and something that Americans need to change.
Jennifer Hunt?
I would say the example about what Americans have voted for in the past is disingenuous. When people voted for JFK, they didn't know about his bad behavior beforehand. You're right, we've never had a presidential candidate that sexualized his children in the way that he did. He talked about dating his daughter, that she was so hot. And so I think it's important to note that all of those questions and all of that sort of bad character weren't covered well in the primaries. They weren't covered very well before the primaries, and by the time we got to the nomination, it becomes one party against another, and you had a huge contingent, including in the female vote, of anti-Clinton. And so I think a lot of those debates needed to be had a lot earlier. Most of his public pronouncements are on Twitter for all to see. The news didn't take them seriously. And so I think we really need to investigate that for the primary seasons in the future to ensure this doesn't repeat itself.
Barnaby Joyce, did his comments on women discomfort you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, I've got 4 daughters, and
the comment about his own daughter that he made in that interview, where he said, "She's so hot. If she wasn't my daughter, I'd be dating her." That was a problem. Yeah,
and obviously I could list a whole range of comments that I find completely and utterly inappropriate. What amazes me is the American people were so angry. I don't think they didn't know. I think they knew exactly. I think that it was well ventilated.
My dad doesn't have Twitter.
The American people were so angry that they still voted for him, and I think it comes. I mean, there's so many reasons. My first cousin's from Tennessee, so they're probably part of that great unwashed, and I know they're Trump supporters. And you know, you ask the question why? They're just. They believe that the media have basically got themselves into a cabal where they've become so tribal, so supportive of one side, that they're just starting to disregard them. They don't feel it's balanced media anymore. They just say, well, why would you bother? We can tell you what it's going to show. It's going to show the left-wing view. And so, you know, we'll make our own minds up. The second thing, I think it came down to a key issue. Hillary Clinton went out, and it was just about Hillary Clinton, you know, big H with an arrow in it, Hillary. And it's all about, and they felt that it was an establishment, and it was just sort of re-endorsing the establishment. And with Trump, the one thing he got right, which I suppose was a stroke of genius, he said, we're going to make America great again. And people went, that's the message. That's what I'm going with.
Joe Siracusa, we have to turn here, don't we, at least in passing, to the fact that Hillary Clinton was a deeply unpopular and divisive figure even before she got the nomination. And in fact, as an American friend of mine said, when the Clintons left the White House, most of America was very, very glad to see them go. And then she comes back as their Democrat candidate.
Well, we got 2 brand names here, brand Trump and brand Clinton. They both were around for 30 years. It's like Pepsi and Coke. You get to choose. And she had a very distinguished career. She put up with Bill. She got through all that. She had a distinguished career as a senator. She'd have had a wonderful career if she just quit as Secretary of State, but she got involved. She had the numbers. I mean, she had the popular vote. I want to just correct something here. When you say all these women, she wiped the floor with him with people your age, the millennials, 18 to 29, 55 to 37. So the map's going to be blue sooner or later, okay? I mean, with the young people. So it's not just everybody voted for the other guy. I mean, she got the majority of votes of young people. But she had a lot of luggage, or baggage, as they say, but she had a lot of positives. She was the steady hand on the tiller, and she could have. She had a wonderful reputation. She was a great legislator. She could have gone across the aisle. She'd have been a consensus builder.
Yeah, but this is woulda, coulda, shoulda.
That's exactly right. Look, I've been saying I always thought you had a pretty good chance. The polls didn't pick things up, and most American newspapers have gone into their autopsies.
So let's get back to the question, which is why then, given all the stuff that Donald Trump said, did so many women vote for Donald Trump?
A lot of the women in the suburbs with an education. decided, and the women in the heartland, they decided that they didn't take him seriously, or literally. They didn't believe that he meant any harm by these comments. They just thought he was talking trash, and as Barnaby has pointed out, they had enough problems to overlook things. They just gave him a sort of a free pass. But for most of us, that wasn't enough. I mean, I just think you cannot talk about people, unless, of course, you're running a reality show for 14 years, unless it's a game, unless you're a true sociopath. You know, you say what you want for 14 years, you say what you want for 17 months, and then you become president and say something else again. That's what scares me about this guy.
Well, that's not necessarily a sociopath. That's potentially a very good salesman, and as Helen has pointed out, someone who might be really quite different and much more a Republican when he's actually got his feet under the desk.
Well, there are 535 people in Congress. There are 110 women. They hate his guts. There are probably 150 Republicans who hate his guts. He is the fly that has entered the spy web, the web, and I think he's in for a lot of trouble in the next 6 to 9 months.
Helen, do you want to jump in and say something there?
Well, you know, after the fall of communism, a lot of the positions in those governments were filled by the apparatchiks from the old regime, and it was just because there weren't enough anti-communists around to staff up entire governments with them. So you had to put up with the old guard because they knew where everything was. I think that's probably going to happen, and I'm reconciled to their ability to thwart Trump on a little bit of his agenda. But hopefully they'll be able to find a middle ground.
Okay. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, you can send a tweet using the hashtag #FactCheckAndQuanda, and keep an eye on our Twitter account and the Conversation website for fact checks by the experts. Our next question comes from Fiona Guo.
Hi. How will Trump's proposed new relationship with China affect the global relationships that Australia has with both China as a pivotal trading partner and also USA as an ally in the future?
Barnaby Joyce, let's start with you. This is the $64,000 question, and no matter how pleased or displeased you might be about Donald Trump being president, this could change everything for us.
Yeah, look, that is Stephanie, is it? That is an
Fiona.
Fiona, sorry. Sorry. Fiona, she's got it written down there.
No, it's
Fiona.
No problem with getting the name wrong. It's all right.
Thank you. Yeah, Fiona, we are going to have a continuing very strong military relationship with the United States. You need that capacity that if it wasn't there, if we didn't have it by working with the United States, our defence bill would go through the roof, because you still got to defend the place. We still got to have a strong, our capacity. First job is to defend our people. China remains an incredibly strong trading partner, our biggest trading partner, and expanding all the time. But we have to also stand behind our beliefs, Fiona, and what we believe in. Democracy, we're all here. Freedom of speech, we're all expressing that tonight, even though we mightn't be agreeing on some issues. And that's the sort of thing you've got to say, where's my philosophy belong? My philosophy belongs in freedom of speech, right to elect my government, rule of law, and a proper and open judiciary. And those rights are expressed very well in the United States, and we express them well here. And so we have a philosophical connection, which is possibly stronger than anything else. We have trading requirements. That's how the economy works. And we have very strong and growing relationships with China as well. And it's not going to be one or the other. But
so can we do both? I mean,
yes, we have to.
If Donald Trump does as he says he's going to do, on the first day that he takes office, he's going to, declare that China's a currency manipulator and slap tariffs on their goods, and the TPP gets thrown up as torn up as we all expect it will be. Can we do both? Can we keep our, strategic alliance and be a great trading partner with China?
Yes, we have to. I mean, we have to. I mean, you got to walk and chew gum at the same time.
But that's a fine line to walk.
But we can't start sort of deserting from our philosophical beliefs. You can't start saying, oh, well, in that case, we're going to start curtailing our views about... Because remember, there are certain minorities in China which are also... they would expect us to stand up for them and clearly express their, in support of them. Okay. And so I'm not going to start walking away from our sort of philosophical beliefs and the things that are fundamentally part of our democracy for any country. And we have to make sure that we respect those, because once we give up on that, we've just sort of prostituted our philosophies, and I don't want to do that.
Joe Siracusa, are these decisions by Donald Trump, if he takes them as he has outlined them, are they potentially very dangerous and risky for us?
Oh, they could be. I don't think he's going to have a trade war with China, though he is angry about their manipulation of their currency. I just don't think he's going down that road. Americans count too much on Chinese imports. China's just too much part of the World Trade Organization, the rest of it. I think that was just something he said. And nothing's really going to disturb the security relationship we have. The ANZUS Treaty's been around, what, 64 years now? It's something you can go to the bank with. It provides Australia with a nuclear umbrella and extended deterrence. Australia doesn't want to spend $200 billion on space projects to get satellites in the sky. Australia's dependent on intelligence every day. And let's not forget in all these conversations, the war on terrorism is going on. That's the war of our generation, and we all need each other's intelligence on it. And I don't think Trump is going to go that way with the Chinese. I think he'd sit down with the Chinese and try to negotiate something. But these things he said are just exaggerated claims to get people's attention. He can walk it back very easily.
Kate Ellis?
Well, to Fiona's question, I think I was just showing off that I knew your name and bun. Sorry.
You win.
You got to take your wins where you can get them. I think in terms of China and the US, we don't know. We don't know what Trump's going to do in terms of follow through. I mean, we know that it would be incredibly difficult to actually implement some of the things that he claimed he would do around imports, around tariffs. And if he did do it, we don't know how China would react. That's the simple answer when it comes to China and the US. But what we do know is about Australia's relationships. And I do absolutely believe that you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Of course, we will continue having a strong relationship with the US. But it's not new that Labor have been saying that we need to be strengthening our independent relationships with Asia. This is the smart thing to do. That's why we went through the Asian White Paper, the Asian Century White Paper when we were in government. That's why the Hawke and Keating governments were reaching out, and it's why we need to prioritise standing on our own 2 feet and having strong relationships with Asia and making them ever stronger.
We have time for just one last question tonight. The time has flown this evening. It comes from Craig Tobler.
Thank you, Virginia. My question is for Joe and Jennifer, and it's a foreign policy and defence question. As a young man who grew up here in Australia and then moved to the United States, I have an interesting view on policy on both sides of the Pacific. My question is really about growing up here in Australia, and when any day during the Cold War we could have been annihilated based on the decision of a foreign power. Based on President-elect Trump's cavalier attitude to the use of nuclear weapons, what are your opinions on whether or not he will be able to keep his finger off the button, and what does that mean for Australia? What does it mean for our NATO allies, and what does it mean for our other allies in this region?
OK, we'll hear from all the panel, I think, on this one, because it's our final one for this evening. Jennifer Hunt, we'll start with you.
Yes, so you're referring to the comment that he made that nuclear proliferation in the region wouldn't be such a bad thing. And he mentioned a couple of states, Japan and South Korea. The news today was that he never said that. Yes. So he tweeted at the New York Times that they misquoted him. And so really, I think that shows that Donald Trump doesn't know what he said. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And so I think it's very difficult for anyone else to speculate. He's already had his phone taken away from him, right, in the last couple of days of the election. Perhaps someone is hiding the nuclear codes as well.
Barnaby Joyce?
Well, I don't believe that a person who, no matter what you might think, who's made billions of dollars, would be that stupid as to come up with a reason where billions of people would die, and that's precisely what would happen if there was a global nuclear calamity. I don't think the Chinese are that stupid that they'd ever do that.